It was 3:19 in the morning, October 24th, 2002. At a highway rest area near Myersville, Maryland, a dark blue Chevrolet Caprice sat among parked vehicles. Its engine was quiet, its windows were dark. From a distance, it looked like the kind of car travelers leave behind for a few hours of sleep before returning to the road. Inside were two people. One was John Allen Muhammad, 41 years old. The other was Lee Boyd Malvo, 17. They were asleep. Around them, police units moved into position with deliberate care. Federal agents were there. Tactical teams were there. A helicopter watched from above. Their instructions were clear. No sudden approach. No careless movement. No chance for the people inside that car to drive away. For 23 days, the Washington metropolitan area had lived under a fear that changed ordinary routines. People stopped filling their cars with fuel unless they had to. Parents walked their children into school. Shoppers hurried through parking lots. A person standing outside, crossing a street, mowing grass, or waiting for a bus could become a target without warning. 10 people were dead. 3 more had suffered life-threatening gunshot wounds. The attackers seemed to be everywhere, and nowhere. There was no clear pattern the public could see, no visible argument, no warning, no safe place that felt truly safe. Yet the object of one of America's largest manhunts was not a fortified building, a remote cabin, or an armed convoy. It was a quiet sedan at a rest area, and hidden inside that ordinary blue car was the answer to a question that had terrified millions of people. Who was choosing strangers from a distance and turning daily life into a hunt? Welcome to Beyond the Gavel, where we look beyond the courtroom headline toward the choices, warning signs, and human cost left behind. Before we continue, subscribe if you believe true crime should do more than recount violence. It should help us notice the dangers that too often go unseen. Before October of 2002, the Washington metropolitan area moved at its usual pace. People crossed from Maryland into Washington, D.C. for work. Parents loaded children into cars before school. Taxi drivers filled their tanks before a shift. People bought groceries, visited shops, cut grass, and waited at bus stops. The region was busy. It was spread across several communities. Yet daily life depended on familiar routines. A person could stop for fuel without checking every rooftop. A parent could watch a child walk to class without fearing a gunshot. A worker could take a lunch break outdoors without looking over one's shoulder. On Wednesday, October 2nd, that sense of normal life began to break. Late that afternoon, a bullet struck the window of a craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland. It missed a worker inside. At first, the report did not explain what was beginning. It could have been an isolated shooting. A single act. A local crime. A short time later, James Martin, 55 years old, stood in a supermarket parking lot in Wheaton, Maryland. He was loading purchases into his car. One shot killed him. There was no argument. No visible attacker. No clear reason why James Martin had been chosen. The next morning, the violence returned. James Buchanan, 39 years old, was cutting grass outside an auto business in Rockville, Maryland. He was killed by a single shot. Minutes later, Prem Kumar Walekar, 54 years old, stopped at a fuel station in Aspen Hill. He was preparing for work as a taxi driver. He was shot and killed beside his vehicle. In Silver Spring, Maryland, a woman sat outside a shopping center. Her name was Sarah Ramos. She was 34 years old. She was killed. In Kensington, Maryland, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, 25 years old, was cleaning her minivan at a fuel station. She was killed. That evening, in Washington, D.C., Pascal Charlotte, 72 years old, was walking along Georgia Avenue. He was killed by a gunshot. 6 deaths had occurred within less than 2 days. The locations did not offer an easy answer. A parking lot, a lawn, a fuel station, a shopping area, a city street. The victims did not appear connected. Their ages were different. Their jobs were different. Their lives were different. By the end of that first wave, fear had entered places people had once considered ordinary. People began to crouch behind their cars while filling fuel tanks. Schools reviewed safety procedures. Parents changed routes. Businesses watched their parking areas. News reports carried every new detail because everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was there one shooter? Or were there several? Police knew the killings could not be treated as separate events. The shots were precise. The timing was alarming. The victims had been selected in public, in places where anyone could have stood. But the person, or people, responsible had left almost nothing for the public to see. No face, no clear vehicle, no known motive. Only a growing list of ordinary places that no longer felt safe. John Allen Muhammad entered the world as John Allen Williams on December 31, 1960, in New Orleans, Louisiana. Accounts of his childhood describe loss at an early age. His mother died while he was young. Relatives helped raise him. The details of a difficult childhood matter as background, but they do not explain the choices he later made. Many people endure grief, hardship, or instability without harming anyone. After high school, Williams joined the Louisiana National Guard. Later, he entered the United States Army. He worked in military engineering roles and served during the Gulf War. He eventually reached the rank of sergeant. Army records showed that he qualified at the expert level with an M16 rifle. That rating reflected strong accuracy during military marksmanship testing. It did not mean he had received formal sniper instruction. Available reporting indicates that he did not receive sniper training in the Army. He left active military service in 1994. Afterward, he spent time in the Oregon National Guard. He also moved between places, pursued work, and experienced growing strain in his personal life. Muhammad had been married and divorced twice. He was the father of children. His second marriage, to Mildred Muhammad, later became the focus of a bitter conflict over custody. Court records and testimony described a serious dispute after the marriage ended. A court awarded custody of the children to their mother. Muhammad did not accept that decision. He took the children without permission and traveled with them across state lines. He was later found with them in Washington state. This was not a private disagreement that should be dismissed as a messy divorce. It was a warning sign of control, resentment, and a refusal to accept legal limits. During this period, he converted to Islam and eventually changed his name from John Allen Williams to John Allen Muhammad. His faith did not cause his crimes. His religion must never be used to assign blame to millions of innocent people who share a belief system. Responsibility belongs to the individual who chose violence. By the time he met Lee Boyd Malvo, Muhammad had become highly mobile. He could travel long distances. He knew how to live with limited resources. He understood vehicles, basic planning, and firearms. Those abilities are not criminal by themselves. Driving across states is not a crime. Owning practical skills is not a crime. Serving in the military is not a crime. What matters is how a person uses those abilities. Evidence presented after the shootings showed that Muhammad used movement, concealment, and gun knowledge in a campaign of murder. He also drew Malvo into his life, giving the teenager direction, approval, and a substitute form of family. Some people who knew Muhammad recalled a man who could be polite, calm, and persuasive. Others described anger, fixation on his children, and hostility toward people he believed had wronged him. We should be careful with labels. No public court finding established a mental illness as the cause of these crimes. We cannot diagnose a person from news accounts or courtroom testimony. What can be stated with confidence is this: Muhammad faced conflict, loss, and legal restrictions. He made choices. He ignored court orders. He built influence over a vulnerable teenager, and he turned practical knowledge into a weapon against strangers. Lee Boyd Malvo was born in Kingston, Jamaica, on February 18, 1985. His childhood was marked by instability and separation. His father was not consistently present. His mother, Una James, searched for work and moved between places. Malvo spent periods of his life without the steady support many young people need. That background does not remove responsibility for later harm. It does help explain why the arrival of a confident older man could carry so much weight. When Malvo was 15 years old, he met John Allen Muhammad in Antigua. Muhammad was older. He had military experience. He traveled with children of his own. To a teenager looking for direction, Muhammad could appear disciplined, capable, and protective. Malvo spent time around Muhammad and his children. Over time, the relationship became much more than a casual connection. Muhammad began treating Malvo like a member of his household. Malvo began calling him father. He even used the name John, Muhammad's first name, during part of their time together. The bond gave Malvo a sense of belonging. It also gave Muhammad unusual influence over him. After they traveled to Washington State, Muhammad became a powerful presence in Malvo's daily life. He took the place of parent, teacher, companion, and authority figure. Their lives became increasingly isolated from other people who might have questioned what was happening. Court testimony described training in physical fitness, firearms use, survival skills, and strict obedience. Muhammad shared his views about power, race, society, and conflict. Prosecutors later argued that the two had become a criminal team, with each person taking an active role in planning and carrying out violence. That was the prosecution's position. Their argument did not portray Malvo as a passive bystander. It held that he knew what he was doing, joined Muhammad in the shootings, and helped make the attacks possible. Evidence connected Malvo to crimes before the Washington area attacks, as well as to the campaign that followed. Malvo's defense presented a different explanation for his state of mind. His lawyers said Muhammad had shaped a deeply vulnerable teenager through isolation, approval, fear, discipline, and repeated messages about right and wrong. They argued that Malvo had been psychologically dominated, much like a young person under the control of an abusive leader. Expert witnesses for the defense described a possible dissociative state. They said Malvo may have struggled to process the reality and moral meaning of his actions at the time of the killings. The court did not accept that argument as a reason to excuse him from criminal responsibility. A jury found Malvo guilty of capital murder for the killing of Linda Franklin. He received life in prison rather than a death sentence. Both things can be true at once. Malvo was a teenager who faced serious instability, and Muhammad may have exploited that vulnerability. Malvo also participated in acts that caused permanent loss for victims, families, and communities. That tension is one of the hardest parts of this case. Understanding influence is not the same as erasing accountability. It means recognizing how dangerous a controlling adult can become when a young person is isolated, dependent, and desperate to belong. The public looked for danger in the obvious places. People watched rooftops. They looked toward wooded areas. They scanned windows in tall buildings. They searched for a person standing apart from everyone else, holding a weapon. They were searching for a shooter who might be hiding at a distance. The people responsible were traveling through the same streets as everyone else. John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo moved in a dark blue Chevrolet Caprice. It was an older four-door sedan, once used as a police vehicle. It did not attract much attention. It could sit in traffic. It could enter a shopping area. It could stop near a fuel station. It could leave before anyone understood where a shot had come from. The vehicle had been changed after Muhammad bought it. The rear windows were heavily tinted. The back seat had been altered so a person could move from the passenger area into the trunk. The trunk interior had been painted blue. Near the license plate, there was a small opening in the trunk lid. That opening was large enough for the barrel of a rifle. This was the truth the public could not see. The gunfire may not have come from a rooftop, a parked truck, or a distant tree line. Evidence later presented in court showed that shots had been fired from inside the trunk of the Caprice. Scientific tests found gunshot residue in that trunk. The rifle recovered from the car was linked through ballistics testing to attacks in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. The arrangement gave the pair a terrible advantage. One person could drive, park, watch the area, or leave quickly. The other could lie inside the trunk, unseen from the outside, and fire through the opening. There was no need for either person to stand in the open after a shooting. No need for a witness to see a face. No need for a person nearby to recognize the source of the gunfire. Their movement made the investigation harder. The attacks crossed county lines, state lines, and different police jurisdictions. A shooting in Maryland could be followed by another in Virginia. A sighting that looked unimportant in one community could become vital in another. The Caprice also appeared ordinary. It was not a military vehicle. It was not a car covered in threatening messages. It was not the white van or truck that early witnesses and news reports had focused on. It was a dark blue sedan moving through a region crowded with dark blue sedans. Inside, investigators later found maps, a global positioning receiver, a digital voice recorder, communication radios, and a list of schools in the Baltimore area. Those items suggested preparation, movement, and an effort to maintain control while traveling. Still, the evidence does not require us to invent details beyond what the case established. We cannot know every conversation inside that car. We cannot know the exact role each man played at every shooting scene. What court evidence does show is a mobile partnership, a modified vehicle, a rifle, and a method designed to hide the shooter from the people closest to the danger. For weeks, the region searched the horizon. The answer was passing through traffic. The numbers tell us there were 10 people killed in the Washington area attacks. But numbers can create distance. Each person had a name, a family, a routine, a place they expected to return to when the day was over. James Martin was 55 years old. He had stopped at a supermarket in Wheaton, Maryland. He was putting purchases into his car when a gunshot ended his life. The next morning, James Buchanan, known to many as Sonny, was working outside an auto business in Rockville. He was cutting grass. That ordinary workday became his last. Prem Kumar Walekar was 54 years old. He drove a taxi. On his way to work, he stopped at a fuel station. He never reached his shift. Lori Ann Lewis Rivera was 25 years old. She was cleaning her minivan at another fuel station. She was a young mother. She was killed in a place built for quick stops and daily errands. Pascal Charlotte was 72 years old. He was walking along Georgia Avenue in Washington, D.C. He was not in a hidden place. He was not taking part in a confrontation. He was walking through his city. Dean Harold Myers was 53 years old. He stopped to fill his car with fuel in Manassas, Virginia. He had served in the United States Navy. He was killed beside his vehicle. Kenneth Bridges was 53 years old. He had stopped for fuel near Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was traveling to visit family. That journey ended at a station where people came and went every day. Linda Franklin was 47 years old. She worked as an intelligence analyst for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She was loading purchases into her car outside a Home Depot store in Falls Church, Virginia when she was killed. Conrad Johnson was 35 years old. He drove a commuter bus. Before dawn, he was standing on the top step of his bus in Aspen Hill, Maryland, preparing for his route. He was killed before he could begin work. And there was Maria Sarah Ramos, 34 years old, killed outside a post office in Silver Spring, Maryland. Her name matters. Every name matters. The violence also left survivors whose lives were changed in seconds. Caroline Sewell, 43 years old, was shot in a shopping center parking area in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. She survived. Jeffrey Hopper, 37 years old, was shot outside a restaurant in Ashland, Virginia. He survived. Iran Brown was 13 years old. On October 7th, he was walking toward Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland. His aunt had just dropped him off. He carried a backpack. He was a child arriving for school. A bullet struck him in the abdomen. Iran survived, but his shooting sent a new message through the region. The danger was not limited to adults at fuel stations, shoppers in parking areas, or workers outside. Children were at risk too. Schools began changing how students entered buildings. Parents walked children to classroom doors. People used trees, walls, and vehicles for cover while crossing open spaces. At fuel stations, customers crouched behind pumps while filling their tanks. The fear did not stay at the crime scenes. It entered school mornings, work commutes, grocery runs, short walks. Every routine that once felt harmless now carried a question. Could this be the place? Could I be the next person? This is where the story asks something difficult of all of us. When did you realize that normal life had become unsafe for this community? Was it the first shooting, the attack on a child, or the moment people began hiding behind their cars during everyday errands? Leave your answer in the comments, not to turn pain into entertainment, but to remember why public safety, empathy, and attention to credible warnings matter. The shootings created fear, but fear was not the only goal. Evidence later presented in court showed that Mohammed and Malvo had tried to turn that fear into leverage. After the shooting of 13-year-old Iran Brown, police found a tarot card near the school. On it were words directed at law enforcement. "Call me God." The message was not a random threat. It was part of an effort to force authorities into a private conversation with the people behind the attacks. The pair made telephone calls. They left written demands. They insisted that police communicate through the news media. They wanted officials to repeat a particular phrase at a public news conference as proof that their demands had been received. Their demand was for $10 million. They wanted access to the money through a bank card, with the ability to withdraw funds anywhere in the world. They also threatened more killings if their demands were ignored. This was extortion. The attacks were being used as pressure. Each new shooting gave the demand more force. Every public warning brought more attention. Every fearful parent, worker, and traveler became part of the pressure campaign. The phrase, "Call me God," showed an apparent desire for power over other people. It is tempting to use a simple label for behavior like this, to call it madness, to call it pure evil, to claim we know what was inside Muhammad's mind. But labels can become a shortcut around understanding. No public court ruling found that mental illness caused these murders. No one watching from a distance can make a reliable diagnosis from headlines, testimony, or recorded threats. What we can examine is conduct. Muhammad ignored laws and court orders. He moved across state lines. He built control over a younger person who depended on him. He used planning, firearms, travel, concealed shooting positions, and public fear to pursue power and money. Malvo took part in that campaign. The fact that he was young, vulnerable, and heavily influenced does not change the harm caused to victims. It does help explain why controlling relationships deserve attention. Control often begins quietly. One person becomes the source of approval, rules, safety, purpose, and belonging. Outside voices are pushed away. Questions are treated as betrayal. Obedience becomes proof of loyalty. In this case, that pattern did not stay private. It reached parking areas, school grounds, fuel stations, and city streets. The goal was larger than taking money. It was to make an entire region feel powerless. And for 23 days, that is exactly what happened. For more than 3 weeks, investigators faced a problem that seemed almost impossible. The shootings crossed many communities: Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C. Each police department had its own witnesses, crime scenes, reports, and urgent questions. A small detail in one state could mean nothing by itself. The same detail, placed beside evidence from another state, could change everything. The break came through a telephone call. On October 17th, a caller contacted police and claimed to be connected to the shootings. The caller said something that demanded attention. "Do not talk about the Washington area attacks," the caller said. "Talk about the shooting at a liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama." That crime had happened weeks earlier. On September 21st, 2 workers had been shot during a robbery at a liquor store in Montgomery. Claudine Parker died. Kelly Adams survived severe injuries. At the time, the shooting appeared separate from the crisis around Washington, D.C. But the caller's message forced police to look again. At the Alabama crime scene, a magazine had been left behind. Not a gun magazine, a printed publication about firearms. Investigators had recovered a fingerprint from it. The print was checked through law enforcement databases. The first searches did not identify a match. Officials expanded the search to immigration records. There, they found a name: Lee Boyd Malvo. The discovery was important, but it was not enough by itself. Investigators needed to know who Malvo was, where he had been, and whether he had any link to the attacks. Records showed that Malvo had entered the United States with John Allen Muhammad. That link brought Muhammad into focus. Law enforcement agencies began collecting records connected to him. They found that Muhammad had been subject to a court order connected to his former wife. The order prevented him from possessing firearms. That restriction created an urgent legal path. If Muhammad had a weapon, federal authorities could act even before proving every detail of the shooting campaign. Investigators also searched vehicle records. They learned that Muhammad was associated with a dark blue Chevrolet Caprice, a 1990 model registered in New Jersey. The car carried New Jersey license plate, November Delta Alpha 21 Zulu. Now police had names. They had a vehicle. They had a license plate. And they had a reason to believe the vehicle could contain a weapon connected to the attacks. On October 23rd, authorities made the information public. They identified Muhammad and Malvo as suspects. They asked law enforcement officers and the public to watch for the dark blue Caprice. The alert spread across the country. For the first time, the investigation had shifted from searching for an unknown shooter to finding two known people and one specific car. Yet the case was not over. A description is only useful if someone sees it. A license plate is only useful if someone recognizes it. Somewhere, Muhammad and Malvo were still moving through the night. And somewhere, a dark blue Caprice could still disappear into traffic. The final search began on the night of October 23rd. Law enforcement officers across the region had the description of the dark blue Chevrolet Caprice. They had the New Jersey license plate. They knew the people they were seeking could be armed. Shortly after midnight, a truck driver stopped at a rest area near Myersville, Maryland. He saw the Caprice. He recognized it from the news alert. The driver did not confront anyone. He contacted police. That decision mattered. Officers confirmed the plate. The car was parked at a rest area along Interstate 70 in Frederick County. Inside, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo appeared to be asleep. Police did not rush toward the vehicle. They watched it. They formed a perimeter. They called in specialized teams. Federal agents joined local and state officers. The goal was to take both men into custody before either could reach the rifle. At approximately 3:19 in the morning, on October 24th, officers moved. They used an armored vehicle to block the Caprice. They broke the windows. They pulled Muhammad and Malvo from the car. Neither man fought the arrest. The quiet blue sedan was no longer just a lead. It was a crime scene. Inside, officers found a Bushmaster rifle, loaded and hidden behind the rear seat. Ballistics testing had connected that weapon to the Washington area shootings. They found the altered rear seat and the hidden route into the trunk. They found the opening near the license plate, where a rifle barrel could be placed without exposing the shooter. They found maps. They found communication radios. They found a digital voice recorder. And they found a laptop computer. The laptop held maps connected to multiple shooting locations. Some locations were marked with skull and crossbones symbols. Investigators also found material linked to the phrase, "Call me God." The evidence did not stand alone. The rifle connected the car to the gunfire. The modified trunk explained how the shooter could remain unseen. The maps showed places connected to the attacks. The communication equipment and digital recorder supported the evidence of planning and the extortion demands. Together, the items inside that car transformed suspicion into a case that prosecutors could place before a jury. One decision by a truck driver had brought the search to an end. But it also opened the door to a far larger question. How much of the violence had been planned before the first person was shot? Which piece of evidence changed this case for you the most? The rifle, the hidden trunk opening, the maps, or the laptop material? Leave your answer in the comments. Your perspective helps keep the focus on how evidence, attention, and timely action can protect lives. The arrest ended the immediate danger. The court cases that followed had a different purpose. They had to establish responsibility, test the evidence, and determine punishment under the law. Virginia prosecuted John Allen Muhammad first. The central charge concerned the murder of Dean Harold Myers, who was killed at a fuel station in Manassas, Virginia, on October 9, 2002. Prosecutors did not argue that this was an isolated killing. They presented the murder as part of a wider campaign of violence. Their case included physical evidence from the Chevrolet Caprice, ballistic evidence from the rifle, evidence of communication with police, and testimony about the killings across the Washington area. On November 17, 2003, a jury found Muhammad guilty. He was convicted of 2 capital murder counts connected to Dean Myers' death. One count was based on more than one murder during a 3-year period. The other count was based on murder committed during an act of terrorism. The jury also found him guilty of conspiracy to commit capital murder and illegal use of a firearm while committing murder. 1 week later, the jury recommended a death sentence for the capital murder convictions. In March of 2004, the trial judge formally imposed that punishment. The Supreme Court of Virginia later upheld the convictions and death sentences. Maryland prosecutors brought a separate case for 6 murders committed during the Washington area attacks. In 2006, a Maryland jury found Muhammad guilty of murdering James Martin, James Buchanan, Prem Kumar Walakar, Maria Sarah Ramos, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, and Conrad Johnson. He received 6 life sentences without parole. The Maryland judge ordered that the life sentences be served one after another, not at the same time. Those sentences were also separate from his Virginia punishment. On November 10, 2009, Virginia executed John Allen Muhammad by lethal injection. He was 48 years old. Lee Boyd Malvo faced his own trials and punishment. In Virginia, a jury found him guilty of capital murder, terrorism, and illegal firearm use for the killing of Linda Franklin. He was 17 years old during the attacks. The jury chose life in prison without parole rather than death. Later changes in United States law required new sentencing consideration for people who were under 18 when they committed crimes. That development affected Malvo's Maryland sentence. But his Virginia life sentences remain in place. The legal record draws an important line. Muhammad was treated as the older leader in the criminal partnership, and Malvo was held accountable as an active participant. The courts examined influence, age, intent, evidence, and harm. But no sentence could restore the lives taken. The verdicts ended the legal question of who was responsible. They could not end the loss carried by the families left behind. This case leaves lessons, but those lessons must be handled with care. No viewer, neighbor, parent, or coworker can guarantee that a violent act will never happen. Responsibility for murder belongs to the person who chooses it. Victims are never responsible for the violence committed against them. Still, prevention becomes more possible when people recognize dangerous patterns early. Control can look like care at first. An older person may offer protection, guidance, gifts, praise, or a sense of belonging. Over time, that person may demand obedience, isolate someone from friends and family, decide where they can go, and punish questions or disagreement. When a young person becomes withdrawn, cuts off trusted people, changes their behavior out of fear, or defends someone who controls them, adults should not respond with blame or ridicule. They should listen. They should ask calm questions. They should help that young person reconnect with safe people and professional support. Threats also deserve attention. A court order, a threat of violence, access to firearms, or an attempt to take children across state lines should never be treated as a private disagreement that others should ignore. When someone faces an immediate danger, contact local emergency services. When there is a credible concern, report it through the appropriate police, safeguarding, or domestic abuse support channel. The DC sniper investigation also shows why information sharing matters. A telephone call pointed police toward Alabama. A fingerprint connected a crime scene to Malvo. Vehicle records connected Malvo to Muhammad. Agencies across different states had to exchange information quickly enough to turn separate fragments into one case. No single officer, witness, or agency solved this alone. And one truck driver saw an alert, recognized the vehicle, and made a call instead of trying to confront the people inside. That was responsible action. If you value true crime that treats victims as people, examines warning signs without blaming those harmed, and looks for lessons beyond the verdict, subscribe to Beyond the Gavel. Because the best reason to study cases like this is not fascination with violence. It is to recognize danger, strengthen community care, and protect people before harm occurs. In the end, the answer was sitting in a rest area. A dark blue Chevrolet Caprice. To passing drivers, it looked like an ordinary car. It had no warning sign, no message on its doors, no visible signal of what police would find inside. That is the central deception of this case. Danger does not always look loud, angry, or obvious. Sometimes it looks controlled, quiet, familiar. It can move through public spaces without drawing attention, while control and isolation grow in private. The people killed during those 23 days were not statistics in a case file. They were neighbors, parents, workers, friends, and family members whose ordinary routines were stolen from them. Beyond the Gavel is not here to turn that loss into spectacle. It is here to ask better questions. When a person begins cutting someone off from support, demanding obedience, ignoring legal limits, or treating fear as power, what can a family, a friend, a school, or a community do before the harm spreads? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more true stories examined with care, accountability, and prevention in mind, subscribe to Beyond the Gavel.